Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan says efforts to stabilise Eskom are on track despite another high-profile resignation.
Around this time last night, we told you that the board chairperson, Mpoma had announced, or it was announced that he was leaving the entity at the end of this month. He's been at Eskom for just a year, making him the shortest-serving chairperson to date.
No clear reasons have been given for his departure. Eskom board member Mteto Nyati has been appointed as chair.
Meanwhile, the position of CEO is still waiting to be filled after Andre de Ruyter's exit earlier this year.
Well, let's unpack the story further with Professor Mark Swilling from Stellenbosch University's Centre for Sustainability Transitions, and we'll also be joined by governance experts Professor Alex van Der Heever from Wits University in a short while. Professor Swilling, let me kick it off with you. I guess the easy place to start would be what you have been advocating for, which is really making a case for SOEs and their success with an example that's not often looked at, DBSA, which has also been quite successful over the years. Firstly, why do you believe that it has not been getting that much attention, despite the fact that it's been very successful?
Well, I think it's mainly because there is a particular kind of addiction in the media, which is to bad news. Good news doesn't make the headlines. Good news is not regarded as the kinds of things that people are going to respond to and watch the news and the adverts. And that's sad, because we are all extremely depressed about the disintegration of our state-owned enterprises all around us and the effects on service delivery. But the Development Bank of Southern Africa, which I wrote about recently, and I was up until recently the chairperson of the board, is a remarkable story of success, of coherence, of expansion, of profit, of making an impact on society. And I just don't understand why that is not as good a story as the failure of Postbank, for example.
Well, there's no disputing the fact that, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. But I wonder if the fact that DBSA in and of itself is so exemplary that it has become more of an exception when it comes to state-owned enterprises than the rule. Because if we look elsewhere, there aren't really that many other examples, and where the failures exist, they are so monumental that it almost eats away at the successes.
Yeah, but that's exactly why one should tell the story. One should, dig deeper and say, why is it that there is an institution, a state-owned enterprise like DBSA, which is succeeding? What can we learn from that? And how do we apply those lessons to other institutions that are struggling? And, I think that's a legitimate story. Because just continuously repeating the story of another SOE failure is leaving the public numb and almost punch drunk. And what they're looking for is some oxygen, is a breath of fresh air that says, well, actually, this can work. There's no reason why, just because it's a state-owned enterprise, it's by definition going to fail. The DBSA proves that wrong.
So let's then get into some of the details, Prof. You, as the outgoing chair of that institution, alongside your colleagues, what do you believe you have used as the recipe, perhaps the winning recipe, to actually get the organization to be functional? Well,
like any state-owned enterprise, it's a complex institution, and there's no one reason. It's a combination. So one of the reasons is that the DBSA does not get any funds from government. And what that means is every year, if it makes a profit, it has got quite a lot of certainty about what the next year looks like, rather than what's, for example, happening now, the threat of budget cuts from the next budget speech. And imagine what it's like being a senior official in a government department that is up for slashing. That creates uncertainty, and you don't attract high quality people under conditions of uncertainty or institutional dysfunctionality. So that's one really important reason. The other important reason is that over the years, the Development Bank of Southern Africa has benefited from the fact that there's been relatively limited political interference. The board has been trusted to search for replacement members, which have been proposed to the shareholder and have largely been accepted. At the same time, the DBSA can attract quality full-time staff because of relatively good salaries, but not too high. They could earn a lot more in the banking sector. So the people who are there do it not just for the money. And that's also really important. And I think finally, good systems. Over the years, very good systems with dedicated staff, including, ethical conduct.
I want to bring into this conversation Professor Alex van der Heever, who is with the Wits School of Governance. Prof. van der Heever, good evening, and thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Mark talks about the importance of stability, and he makes the point that, Patrick Dlamini stayed at the helm of DBSA for close on a decade as the CEO running that institution. If we are comparatively to look at it with what is happening at Eskom, being one of the worst case scenarios, recently Transnet as well, there just is a high rotation of individuals in those senior positions. Often we're made to feel that it's not, it's not that serious, but clearly it is quite impactful.
Yes, so we have to look at the structural reasons for why this is occurring, because although you might have one or two organizations which tend to be stable over time because they haven't been interfered with, we have to look at the structural reasons which have allowed for the interference in the leadership functions of these organizations. That's Transnet, PRASA, Eskom, the Post Office, South African Airways, the whole litany of disasters. And part of it is that these actually are organizations that are also self-funded, just like the DBSA, but they also involve lots of procurement, lots of decisions which have lots of vested interests behind them, and that attracts patronage. And the political interference, our current government shareholder model for these state-owned enterprises is deeply flawed. It's designed to fail because it allows for an entry route into these patronage opportunities through the government, the government shareholder. And that one person can influence the design of the board. It can influence the appointments into the chief executive positions. So now you're right into the leadership functions of these organizations. And when you see these high turnovers over time, the instability in the leadership on the one hand and the poor leaders that get appointed, you're seeing the pattern develop, because really what's happening is behind the scenes, somebody's trying to get at that organization through the appointments. And when you design a public company, a public organization, you don't design it to allow for you don't leave the keys in the car. You put locks on the door. And essentially you've got to have a separation from government and proper public accountability, not the sense of accountability through a government shareholder. So this model that we've had, as we've seen in South Africa, is a case study in failure and what not to do. We really have to redesign our overall structural arrangements around the governance of these organizations. And I would agree that state organizations and public organizations can function well. It's not that they will always fail, but they will definitely always fail with this model.
Mark, this issue of interference really seems to be at the heart of why we do have sort of all of this revolving door at our SOEs, right? And there's really very little reason for us to believe that it's any different this time around with Eskom, given the recent reports around, the tensions between the minister and the board chair over the appointment of, and the board really, over the appointment of a CEO. Is there anything that the DBSA has done to protect itself from protection, Or have you found that you happen to be in a position where you're not having to deal with so much interference because you're primarily a lending institution?
Well, I agree that the institutions that were referred to with large procurement budgets are particularly vulnerable. So I think that's a very valid argument. But at the same time, a lending institution which can allocate capital to SOEs as well as to municipalities and other infrastructure agencies is also vulnerable. And we've seen financial institutions also getting wrecked. So I think what you have in the DBSA and also in the IDC is a combination of board leadership, executive leadership, and a culture which, in particular in the DBSA, over time, of not bowing down to political interference. And if you create an impression as an institution that you are not up for grabs, that you are not going to be pliable, that you are going to be able to stare into the eye of the shareholder and not blink, that means that politicians are going to think twice before they're going to try and exert undue influence, which could have negative consequences over time. So it's how you lead. It's how you lead within a political system and within a financial system that makes it very, very clear that you are not prepared to compromise. And sometimes you take serious flack. The former chief executive of the DBSA has publicly said that he came under pressure to agree to compromises the governance of Eskom, which he refused to do, and he came under very serious pressure about that. But he stood his ground, and he was highly respected for that within the financial sector, and it really saved Eskom.
Alex, this issue of culture seems to be a big one, because often when we talk about some of these big procurement deals where the PFMA wasn't followed, sort of all other legislation completely being bypassed, it seems to come down to one or two individuals who are either willing to take the stand to say this is not going to happen, or who ultimately become whistleblowers. But that in and of itself says a lot about what is endemic in our SOEs as culture, as far as culture is concerned. Is it possible to breed culture again when you have this high rotation of leadership?
Well, I think we have to sort of locate the argument of culture within the overall structural context. The arguments that have just been made that suggest that you can push back against political leadership and improper moves to take control of aspects of the organization, I'd say is a fallacy. Many people have tried to withstand that in Eskom, in SARS, in the post office, all the way through all of these public institutions. There'd be people who've said no, and then they get checked, then they get moved out. So they get removed, boards get changed. So the issue at the end of the day is who can change a board, who can remove a CEO, who can suspend somebody in a key position. And if you have a whistleblower, can they just be suspended? And as we've seen in the case of PRASA, you've got senior executives from within that organization who are whistleblowers who are still under threat from that organization today, despite what they've revealed. And nothing has been done to address the issues that they have raised. So the problem is structural. It's about whether the structural framework allows the leadership to stand up and say no, because nobody can actually remove them from the executive of government. Now, if you've got that, then you'll have stability in leadership, and you can develop an organizational culture that will be very productive. But one thing's very clear: if you've got a very good organizational culture that has been built up over time, and then you get subjected to capture, it's a very, very short period of time, and that culture is shredded. It takes 1 or 2 years to eliminate an organizational culture. So the problem that we've had is that the instability that we've permitted through political interference in our public organizations is one that has basically allowed the culture of delivery in the country to be completely upended, and for many of the good people to leave those organizations because they are not sustainable for anybody who actually wants to do their job or has a public interest motivation to be in a public organization. So that culture goes. So it's not good enough just to have it at some point, because it can just be demolished.
So Alex, part of the reason why we felt it was important to have this conversation is really to intentionally look at what has worked and see, well, can this actually be replicated elsewhere? So can what has been done at DBSA be done at Transnet, be done at Eskom under the current environment and current frameworks? You seem to be suggesting very much that within our context, DBSA is an outlier, really.
Well, I just said that they're lucky. They haven't yet been sustained. They haven't had to face a sustained attack. And there might be reasons for that. But where there has been a sustained attack on any organization, the existing incumbents have not been in a position to hold the fort. Yeah. And that has included organizations such as SARS that had a very good organizational culture, which were delivering and were on a process of continuous improvement, completely demolished and reversed, and is now in a process of recovery. So yes, so the issue does come down to whether or not the leadership function of those organizations has a sufficient moat and wall around it, such that it can actually exercise a discretion over running that organization. But further than that, is that the leadership of that organization with that degree of autonomy must still be held to account, but it must be held to account for what they do, not for political motives and shady deals to be done. Now, that's what we've allowed. So it's really a matter of time as to whether or not the organizations that are functioning, just because somebody has exercised the discretion not to take over that organization. So that's where I say, yes, what you will be seeing in DBSA, or what you might be seeing in the Western Cape, organizationally at a municipal level, at a provincial level, they're performing extremely well with many of the weaknesses that we've got in the governance structures around the other provinces and municipalities in place in the Western Cape, but somebody's exercising a discretion not to abuse that power. That, to me, is problematic. We actually have to take away the discretion to be able to attack an organization. You must remove it.
All right.
And there must be strong methods in place, strong structures in place to prevent that.
All right. Mark, let me give you the last word here.
Yeah, I would agree with the structuralist analysis. I agree we need a fundamental reorganization, and the President's State-owned Enterprise Council has come up with proposals to relocate the governance of state-owned enterprises into a super kind of structure, which I have some reservations about, but at least the conversation is taking a place about reorganizing the structural relationships. I agree with that. But as Alex has said, that even under the existing system, it is possible for boards and executives to develop a way of operating that can protect the institution under very difficult circumstances. It is possible, and I think we need to also reflect on that, because there are other people who would like to rebuild, such as SARS, under the current commissioner. It is getting rebuilt. It is possible to do. It's extremely difficult, and you can destroy it in 2 years, I agree. But it is possible, and it is possible to kind of build institutions that can withstand the pressures.
All right. On that note, we'll leave it there for tonight. Professor Mark Swilling is with Stellenbosch University, and Alex van der Heever is a professor with the Wits School of Governance. Thank you both for your time.